and welcome to Joy in Our Town, TV in St. Joseph, Kansas City. I am your host, Lindsay Hardiman. Today we are joined with Lacey Maltby of the Kids TLC program. Lacey Maltby, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. So can you open up by telling our viewers a bit about yourself and how you got involved with Kids TLC?
Absolutely. I have been working in the field of autism for about 15 years in the Midwest and also on the West Coast. And Kids TLC has been around since the 70s. So when I joined the Kansas City area, I looked around for really high quality providers to provide services for not only children with autism, but children with other behavioral health needs. And Kids TLC is one of those great organizations in the area.
That's wonderful. All right, so you said autism. Can you tell our viewers what is autism?
Autism is a neurological disability. It's in the developmental disability arena. And children with autism have three areas of really deficits. Communication and language. Oftentimes they have repetitive behaviors that aren't necessarily functional for their age range. And then also pretty significant social deficits, meaning that they might not know how to make friends and do that inappropriately.
Right.
Or they might not really want to interact with others. They might prefer to be more isolated.
Does that mean there's different forms of autism?
What the current criteria is that there's an autism spectrum disorder.
Okay.
The key word is just spectrum. In some kids, they all have the same three deficits. In some children, it can just be more severe versus other children who are more mildly impacted. So we might have a child who is functioning well below their chronological age. They might be non-speaking. They might have significant problem behavior versus a child who is on the other end of the autism spectrum who is functioning at grade level or above, might be gifted in some areas, and really just needs to focus on that social skills piece.
All right. So how common is autism?
Right now, the CDC reports that autism is 1 in 68 children.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the prevalence just continues to increase. Since I've been in the field, they've updated that statistic 3 times.
Wow.
Yes.
So since you said it updates quite frequently, so how many can get diagnosed in a day or maybe even a week? How does this change?
You know, we have a couple of major diagnostic clinics in the area, and I don't know how many kids can get diagnosed in a day. What I do know is that I get on average about 5 calls a week from newly diagnosed families, mostly for kids ages 4 and younger.
Okay, so you said there's a large spectrum as far as the disorder goes. Does this vary between the sexes? Does age play a role in it? What factors into this?
There is a higher prevalence in boys versus girls. As far as other, demographic type information, there's really autism isn't picking a certain age or a certain culture or anything like that. It's consistent among, the entire community.
So it can happen to anyone?
Absolutely.
All right, so let's say I'm suspecting that something is wrong with my child. What should a parent go out and do?
I think the best resource for most families of young children, if they have their children in a daycare or early childhood setting, is talking to that provider. Most early childhood centers do developmental assessments and evaluations as children progress through their program to try to hone in on if there are any developmental delays. They would definitely be a good resource for those families. Also, a child's pediatrician is another person that would be a good resource. Typically, pediatricians have milestones assessments at well visits for parents to complete to detect any delays in language, development of any kind. And once professionals kind of start to notice that, we need to decide what the additional steps are that parents need to take to make sure that they get their answers. The best thing that parents can do is act quickly and identify a developmental disability as soon as possible so that they can get treatment.
Okay, so you said act quickly. So what are some red flags to let us know, okay, we should probably go see a pediatrician or someone?
Well, if your child is 2 and they're not speaking yet. You haven't heard those one-word utterances.
Yeah.
If kids have started one-word utterances, but they're more like 3 and they're not using multiple words. If you see kids not wanting to interact socially with you, if you have a child who'd rather sit by himself and play with the same toy over and over again versus, Mommy, come over here and do this with me, which is
Right.
how kids are. Kids are
Right.
naturally social.
Exactly.
Those are some of the main things I would encourage parents to look for. There are other, gross motor delays and milestone delays if kids do not crawl on time, if kids don't walk on time, things like that that can indicate a larger issue.
Okay. All right, so we're going to take a few moments to put some information on the screen for our viewers at home. If you would like to get more information about the autism program with Kids TLC, or you just want to see what else they offer, you can go to their website at kidstlc.org, or you can call the autism office. It is 913-324-3849. All right, so we have those red flags coming up in our children. So how is Kids TLC helping these children with autism? So we already went to the pediatrician and they've been diagnosed with autism. How are you all helping them?
We are helping them by, once the pediatrician identifies that there's an issue and refers them to a diagnostic clinic, if parents don't know where to go, we can be a resource for them to help them navigate that system and find a diagnostician who can give that medical diagnosis. And then we are also helping mostly at the treatment level. We have several different programs that serve children with autism. The autism program specializes in applied behavior analysis therapy, which is an incredibly effective therapy for children with autism.
Okay.
It takes place on an intensive basis. Children are typically receiving therapy between 25 and 40 hours a week. And in addition to speech-language pathology and occupational therapy in our program.
Okay.
We have other programs with different types of therapy that can also be effective for kids who have autism but are higher functioning. They're less impacted by their autism spectrum disorder. And for those children, they might benefit from traditional outpatient behavioral health services. Their parents might benefit from family therapy with us. And then we have a couple of more intensive outpatient programs using a different type of therapy than ABA that might work for them as well.
So there's several types of treatment options out there.
Absolutely.
Just whatever works better for the child.
Absolutely.
What about in the education system? So do you typically see autistic children in a regular classroom setting? I know you said there's different treatment options, but with this treatment, can they stay in the regular classroom, or how does this work?
Yes, and again, it comes down to the individual child. For children that are more severely impacted, they might need some additional supports within their school district. Many school districts have special services programs where kids can receive more intensive educational services versus being in a classroom, in a general education classroom with neurotypical kids. It really just depends on which setting is going to be best for the child.
All right. So if they are needing the extra help, how does the school offer this help? Will they pair them with someone one-on-one, or is there a class they have to go into throughout the day?
There is an individualized education plan process where the IEP team decides what supports that child needs. It could be in the form of accommodations for testing, something very minimal. It could be all the way up. Maybe they do need one-on-one paraprofessional support because they have problem behavior and they need to, move away from the classroom at some point,
Right.
or they're eloping from the classroom, so they need someone to keep them safe. Other options for accommodations could be using a calculator or a typewriter instead of having to write out their work. Many children with autism have fine motor deficits. So the sky is the limit.
Right. Yeah.
Whatever that child needs, that IEP team can come together and talk about what the solution could be.
All right, so we got them treated and we're getting them going. So how quickly should we work to get this treated? If we don't act on it soon, does it affect them? How does this work?
Well, the key to early behaviorally based intervention is the number one thing that parents can do for their children. What happens is when kids are young, the skills are very singular that they're learning. As kids get older, they become more complex and they build on one another.
Okay.
So when we have a child who's 2.5 start with us, the gap between their chronological age and developmental abilities is fairly small. So it's pretty reasonable that we would be able to close that, and then they would continue to progress normally. Versus a child that's 10 years old and has not had any early intervention, that gap is much bigger. And so closing that gap becomes much more difficult.
Yeah. So, we want to work to close this gap. Can autism ever be cured, or is there something you're with throughout your entire life? You can just get treatment to make it not as hard on you.
That's a good question. Right now, autism is diagnosed through observable, measurable behaviors. So it's not a situation where you draw blood and you're like, oh, yep, you have the autism gene. It's much more complex than that, which is why we have to look at it from an observable perspective. What can happen is that children's behavior can change with treatment over time to the point where those behaviors that were once present may no longer be observable and measurable to where they qualify for an autism diagnosis. Is there a cure for autism? No. The autistic brain develops differently than the neurotypical brain, but I am certainly no expert on that subject. So that is from a very high level.
Yeah, so it again goes back to the individual itself.
Yes.
All right, so we're going to put some information on the screen for our viewers at home. If you are just tuning in, we are joined with Lacey Maltby, the Autism Program Director with Kids TLC. And if you would like to get more information, you can visit the website on the screen at kidstlc.org, or you can call 913-324-3849. All right, so in our last few minutes here, what are some tips you would want to give to parents and families who have an autistic child?
Oh, I think the best tip that I can give to families is to work collaboratively with the professionals, whether it's a school team or a private ABA team. Work with them collaboratively to make sure that whatever the goals that they're working on are going to help improve your family unit. When we're working with families affected by autism, it is very much about the individual with autism, but it also is about the family unit. And we need to make sure that we're improving their quality of life as quickly as we possibly can. So being advocates for themselves and what they need as a family is probably the best tip that I could give them.
All right, and do you all accept volunteers?
Kids TLC thrives because we have such amazing volunteers. And we have, that main number can be called, and you can talk with our community director who gets people in touch with how they can contribute back to Kids TLC.
All right, well, wonderful. Well, Lacey Maltby, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, viewers, for tuning in to Joy in Our Town, TV in St. Joseph, Kansas City. I am your host, Lindsay Hardiman, and have a great week.
TBN's Holy Land Experience in Orlando, Florida is an amazing place where you can step back 2,000 years in time and experience the wonder of ancient Israel. Experience Jesus yesterday, today, and forever at TBN's Holy Land Experience.
No one should ever be sexually assaulted or abused, but it happens every day. It's important that we come together as a community and believe a victim when he or she comes forward to disclose that they've experienced this trauma. It's also important to know that MOXA can help. So if someone you know has experienced sexual abuse or assault, please call us 24 hours a day at 816-531-0233. Or you can visit our website at www.moxa.org.
Hello, and welcome to Joy in Our Town, TV in St. Joseph, Kansas City. I am your host, Lindsay Hardiman. No one should ever be sexually assaulted or abused, yet it happens every day right here in our community. So join with us is Melanie Austin, the Director of Education for the Metropolitan Organization to Counter Sexual Assault. Melanie Austin, thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Okay, so let's start by telling our viewers a bit about yourself and how you got involved with MOXA.
Sure. So I actually heard about MOXA through a friend, and I thought that the mission and the work sounded like something that would be really rewarding to be a
Right.
part of.
Right.
And so I applied to do some education work with them, and here I am today, about five and a half years later.
Oh, wow, that's a long time.
Yeah.
All right, so why was there a need for sexual assault services in our area?
Well, the truth is that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will experience sexual abuse or assault by the time they're 18 years old. And we know that sexual assault and abuse occur in any community. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter what you look like. We know that this issue affects everybody. And so it's likely that someone you know probably needs MOXA in our services. Additionally, it's just very important that we help people
Right.
that are affected by this,
Right.
because there is a chance for hope and healing for them. MOXA can provide that, as well as do some prevention work around it. And one stat I can share is that last year, MOXA went to the hospital over 700 times to provide support and advocacy for a victim of sexual assault. So if you think about that, it's about twice a day,
Right.
averaging that victims are going to have these forensic exams done. And so, and we know that the number of these things occurring is even higher.
Right.
Because a lot of people don't report what's happened to them or won't seek help if something like this has happened to them. So.
All right, so in the cases that are reported, does the victim typically know their attacker? Is the cases mainly women, men? What is that?
That's a great question. About 85% of people know their perpetrator or their attacker. So, it could be someone you know, someone you're dating, a friend, a family member. Usually it's someone you know. A lot of people think when you think of rape and sexual assault, you think of strangers or
Right.
stranger danger.
Right.
But the truth is, that's not really who the perpetrators are. It's
Yeah.
usually someone that you know. And most perpetrators are men. Women do also perpetrate sexual assault and abuse as well, but most perpetrators are men.
All right, so just as you said, we keep saying sexual assault and sexual abuse, but what are some types and examples? You just said rape, but I know there's many more, so can you tell us a bit
Yeah, so kind of what we like to say, we kind of think of an umbrella.
Okay.
You can think about the term sexual violence.
Okay.
And underneath that umbrella are things like child sexual abuse. And that can include things such as, inappropriately touching or forcing a child to watch something that's pornographic or something along that line, taking pictures of them, that kind of stuff can fall under child sexual abuse. And then you can there's different types of sexual assault, but it's really any type of sexual activity without consent or permission for that activity. And so it can be anything up to and including rape, which I've mentioned. And one thing I like to say is that different states have different laws and definitions when it comes to things like sexual abuse or sexual assault. And so it's important to know in your state kind of what those laws might be. But kind of the general definition I gave just now, it covers a lot.
And what are some of the laws for Missouri?
Well, Missouri has a lot of different
Okay,
laws.
okay.
So I probably would rather not go into them
Right.
all just because I'm
Understand
not an expert on the laws. But, you have laws when it comes to like child pornography, and then you have laws about sexual assault and rape, and laws about like the age of consent, essentially, like when can you consent to sexual activity, that kind of stuff. So I'd rather, they're very easy to look up,
Yeah.
but I'd rather not go over the specifics of those. And I did want to mention that there's what we call different types ways that rape can be facilitated. So we have drug facilitated rape. That's when someone's under the influence of drugs or alcohol. And you also have things like marital rape. So sometimes people think when they're in a relationship with their, partner, their husband, their wife, or something or other, that maybe rape can occur in that situation, but it can. Because
Right.
any time that someone's forcing you to do something without your consent
Right.
is considered sexual assault or rape. So I wanted to cover that as well.
All right, so you said that 85% of the time we know our perpetrator, and you can be, raped by your partner or spouse. And you keep saying consent. So as long as it's not consent, so what's considered not to be consent?
Great. Well, first, let's start off with just that consent should be freely given.
Okay.
And that it should be verbal. There's so many ways that you can give consent through your body language,
Right.
nonverbal communication.
Right.
But to be absolutely sure, it should be verbal. And you can't give consent when you're being forced to do something, when you're being threatened or coerced into it. And those types of things are listed in the law, if you're forced to do something. But then you can't give consent if you're being blackmailed. You can't give consent if you're passed out or
Exactly.
asleep, we say, right? So if you are not awake or pass out for whatever reason, you can't consent to activity. You can't give consent if you're under the age. So the age of consent varies, by different states have different laws again. But so it's just, those are a lot of the main times when you can't give consent legally.
All right.
So-
So at the end of the day, if you never verbally said it and given the okay, then you might not even want to go into those rough waters of it.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it would be nice if it was black and white,
Right.
right?
Right.
But you definitely, again, it needs to be consent should be freely given, and it's best when it's verbally given because it's very clear then. The communication is clear about what's okay and what's not okay.
All right. So what should one do if they have been sexually assaulted?
Oh, that's a great question. So if you or someone you know has experienced sexual abuse or assault, there's several things that you can do. You can call MOXA's 24-hour crisis line, and we can provide some support and resources on what you can do. That number is 816-531-0233. And you can also go make a police report. So you can call the police and make a report. You can go to a hospital emergency room, and most of the hospitals in our metro area have what you call a SANE exam, a sexual assault nurse exam, or a forensic exam, and that's where they collect evidence.
Okay.
And those exams are usually or always actually free of charge. So if you have some other injury related that you need medical treatment for, that part you'd probably be charged for those health services, but the actual evidence collection is free of charge. And again, numerous hospitals have that program here in the metro area, and it's fabulous that we have that available.
All
That
right.
makes it easy for people to seek the help that they need.
Right.
If you do go to a hospital, oftentimes you can make a choice then to report right there at the hospital. A police officer will usually come or the detective. So you can make a report then. You don't have to report right away. Sometimes people don't want to report right away for different reasons. And then every single time somebody goes to the hospital, MOXA is automatically called, and we send an advocate to provide support and resources and information. And there's a lot of great research saying that if people have advocates to help them through this difficult time,
Right.
that they're more likely to stick with working in the criminal justice system, getting the help that they need.
Right.
So those are the things that you can do, or tell a trusted friend,
Right.
and try to get some support because it's a very scary, traumatic thing that you've probably just gone through.
Definitely. All right, so we're going to put some information on the screen for our viewers at home. If you would like to get more information about MOXA, the Metropolitan Organization to Counter Sexual Assaults, you can give them a call at their main number at 816-931-4527. But if you are going through a crisis and you want to reach that crisis line, you can go ahead and call them at 816-531-0233 or go to that website located on the screen at moxa.org. All right, so earlier on you just said reporting. If reporting these incidents, is it anonymous? How does this work?
Yeah, you can report something anonymously. That if you do have a kit collected, you can give your evidence or have your evidence collected anonymously even. So that's a really great
Right.
option for people.
Exactly.
And because you might decide to report at a different time.
Right.
It's important to know that people who have experienced sexual abuse and assault have experienced a real devastating trauma, and that trauma really affects, it affects our brains and
Exactly.
how we react. And so it's sometimes difficult for people to understand, well, why wouldn't you want to report right away?
Right. Right.
But to understand that every person has a right to make that decision and make it in the time that's right for them. And so that's a nice thing. I would encourage people to report.
Exactly.
But they also have to feel safe and supported in doing so.
Right.
And so that's one thing that we as a community can do. We can believe people when they tell us that they've been sexually abused or assaulted.
Right.
And we can provide that support as a community, so it makes it easier for them to come forward and report, and therefore then easier to also hold perpetrators accountable.
Exactly. Okay, so earlier on you said consent. And as far as consent goes, we must learn what consent is. So at what age should parents start educating their children about sexual abuse?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at Moxa, we have a program called Project Aware, and we start pre-K through 5th grade that we do that programming in. And what we do is we just talk to kids about body safety, about safe and unsafe touches. We help them to identify that sexual abuse is never their fault, help them to identify an adult to talk to, help them to identify what are the private parts of their body. And then we give them 3 safety rules to say no, get away, and tell someone.
Okay.
And so as a parent myself, I think that it's probably never too early.
Right.
With my 4-year-old, I told her right away, these are the private parts of your body. And
Right.
as soon as she was learning the parts of her body, we started having those conversations and talking about boundaries and what's okay and what's not okay. And so I think that's really important to start, just to start early
Right.
with kids about their bodies, about good boundaries and that kind of stuff, and about safe and unsafe touches as well.
Exactly.
So,
All right, well, viewers, if you would like to get more information about the Project Aware, or you simply want more information about the organization itself, again, you can call that number on the screen at 816-931-4527, or that crisis line at 816-531-0233, or visit the website at moxa.org. All right, and in closing, as we have run out of time right now, what overall would you want to say to our viewers? How can we come together as a community and help try to lower these rates and end the sexual abuse?
great. I think there's 2 things that we can do as a community. We can believe victims when they come forward and support them. I think that's just so huge, because there's so many times when we want to not believe them.
Right.
Or just say, no, that didn't really happen, or so we can believe and support victims. The second thing we can do is just become good, active bystanders.
Yeah.
When you see something going on that isn't right or isn't okay, that it's okay to approach that, whether that's directly or indirectly, to say something and to change our culture. And that way, that makes it also easier for victims to come forward and receive the help that they need.
Right.
So,
Well, Melanie Austin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you, viewers, for tuning in to Joy in Our Town TV in St. Joseph, Kansas City. I am your host, Lindsay Hardeman, and remember, no means no.
This program has been sponsored by the Trinity Broadcasting Network and made possible by your telephone dollars. Your continual support can keep Joy in Our Town brought to your home every day. So write Joy in Our Town, P.O. Box A, Santa Ana, California, 92711.